going to talk about something a little bit more personal, specifically my, let's say, journey or pseudo-romance with voice over IP and Asterisk and Camilio and all of that. So a little bit about myself. I have two amazing daughters back home. I'm the CEO of Cloudonics. What is Cloudonics? I'll tell you in a bit. I'm a VoIP architect. I see myself as an Uber geek, and I'll explain what an Uber geek is. An Uber geek is somebody who can't stop playing. Like I will play, if it looks like a keyboard, I will automatically be drawn to it. Do you remember those times where you would go into public places and there will be like these internet posts, internet cafes that were all metal? I will just see them and I will be automatically drawn into it. Yes, I am an amateur chef, which means that if you will ever get to Israel and I'll invite you to my house, you're in for a very good dinner. And if you want to go cross-country cycling, I'm also your partner. So a little bit, what is Cloudonics? So Cloudonics is very different. It is not a CPaaS, UCaaS, or CCaaS. It is something else. Some of it we call it an uncarrier platform. Some call it a CPaaS enablement platform. If you want to learn more about it and you want to talk about it, or things like SIP SDKs for mobile devices interest you, you're welcome to talk to Eric or myself afterwards. We're going to tell you more about them. So, as I said, this presentation is very different from the presentation. Anybody here ever been to any of my presentations at Astricon? Because I've been doing these for a few years now. Yeah, quite a few. Okay, so this is going to be a very different presentation. So normally I would do tech talks and I would talk about ARI and security and scalability. I'm going to talk about something a bit more personal this time. And it is my own personal journey from where I started with Asterisk somewhere around 2001, which is when I started with all of this stuff, and how I more or less evolved and things that I had to cope around through the process. I don't know how many of you are entrepreneurs or have a business, but maybe you can relate. So this is more or less me in 2001. I admit, yes, this is what I look like. I know it looks weird, but it really depicts who I was, because back then I was doing mostly IT. I was working for a company, and my days and nights were more or less at the keyboard. I was installing servers back then. I was doing SMS, whatever you want. And the problem with this character that you see on the board is normally that this character has a boss, right? Everybody normally has a boss. And the thing was that back then, so my boss wanted to do a service. Back then it was an SMS-enabled callback system. It was supposed to work in Africa and all kinds of places like that in the world. And various things happened from there. But the question is, how did I get to Asterisk? From that point, from that, pardon the expression, lazy fat geek that was on the screen, how did I get from there to Asterisk? And the reason, and the primary reason, was that I was totally pissed off. So I was working at this company, we're doing SMS, and the amazing thing was that we had this really annoying PBX system in the office, a Panasonic one. It would break constantly. Every 2 days, I would have another technician come in. The voicemail didn't work. That didn't work. It was a pain in the butt. And I had a few things working against me. Number one, I was pissed off at Panasonic for not fixing their stuff. Number two, I was too geeky, which means that I was trying to fix it on my own. And at some point, I just became too proud, saying, there is no chance I can't fix this, which is like, how many of you have ever encountered that point where they're saying, that thing broke, I'm not willing to call anybody to fix it simply because I must be able to fix it. I'm confident that at least a few of you have encountered that, and I was really into open source. I remember back then, that's what I loved. I still love open source. This is the main thing I do. And what happened was that I started looking on the internet, and I found this group of people, back then it was like 2001, that were talking about doing voice over IP PBX in the office, and it was an open source thing that I could compile. And between all of us, back then, it was a piece of shit. It was so horrible. It didn't have any documentation. Configuration files were scattered all over the place. And if you really wanted to do something, you had to work really, really hard. But for some odd reason, I liked that. It appealed to me, and I started using it. And eventually, I ended up building our Office PBX on that, complete dial plans, everything from scratch. There was no free PBX. There was no, back then, AMP. Anybody remember AMP? Asterisk Management Portal? That was the predecessor to free PBX. The original project. What?
Wasn't it Asterisk Now?
No. Asterisk Now is already free PBX, technically. The AMP, Asterisk Management Portal, was a predecessor to free PBX, to what we know today as free PBX. So I did that. And then I built a callback system. Then I built a billing system where I worked. And remember, I was doing the IT. I was the IT guy. I was making sure that everybody works. And suddenly I started being a developer, simply because I knew how to do stuff. And then around 2003, something really weird happened. Namely, the place I was working at became really, really boring. Why was it boring? Because the company got into some issues, and I didn't have much to do. So I discovered this thing, wholesale voice over IP. How many of you do wholesale? 1, 2, just 2 people in the crowd. The others are not willing to admit that they're doing wholesale. Now, wholesale back then in 2003 was a margin of, if a call would cost at the wholesale level 17 cents a minute, you will sell it for 22. How many of you are making 5 cents per minute on a call? Nobody. That doesn't exist right now. And it more or less felt like this. It was literally a scene out of a movie. I was sitting at my computer day and night, manning the servers, making sure calls traverse. We had H323, we had SIP interconnects, we had everything. I built everything from scratch. Back then, I got to know a few community members that were completely wild, totally wild. Some of them are still here, by the way. But it was really interesting. Now, wholesale voice over IP, I don't know if any of you have ever done, like the guys you know who are doing it know very well that you can make a lot of money, but if you close your eyes for a few minutes at the wrong time, you will lose a lot of money. Yeah, it's exactly like that. And eventually, after about 24 months of doing wholesale voice over IP, back then, Ronnie, we worked together. He was doing the sales, I was doing the technical. We actually, due to a customer ripping us off, we ended up in debts of almost $470,000 in less than a week. Yep, that's the face we did as well. Only we had the worst face. Well, we negotiated. Somewhere around 2006, so Ronnie and I were working together for almost 4 years. Somewhere around 2006, Ronnie and I do the most stupid thing in the world. We did something that today you would seem like, well, that's kind of logical to do. We actually, in 2006, we saw the need for multi-tenant systems. They didn't exist back then. Nobody had a multi-tenant system. So we set out to build a highly scalable multi-tenant environment, and that's what we did. We worked on it for about a year. We raised money. We floated a company in the London Stock Exchange, which was pretty funny. We even got Mark to come over to Israel. Yes, that is an actual picture of Mark Spencer in 2006 walking around with a penguin bag on his back. That's a penguin backpack. It's a real photo. We had a big thing. We launched it. We showed it at Von 2006 in Boston. We even managed to have 2 customers. We even had 2 customers. But thankfully enough, over 12 years passed, so I can say this. But what happened was, The 6 months after those pictures were taken, the company went belly over in the most colossal way ever. And why did that happen? Basically, we got ripped off by the company's chairman. He more or less siphoned all of the company's cash into his own pocket, which led me to a very sad truth that sometimes you need to trust your gut, even if you're not the business guy in the company. Now, at that point in time, I decided that I am more or less sick of corporate life. I'm sick of startups. I'm sick of managing people. I'm sick of people telling me what to do. And I decided to go freelance. And in March 2007, basically, I leave everything and go completely on my own. It felt more or less like this. It's like you're putting on your backpack, putting on your shields, going out to war. You're like saying, okay, my fate is in my own hands. And how many of you are freelancers who work on your own? And when I say freelancers, I don't mean just because you're a sole proprietor. I mean companies that include only one person. That's a freelancer. None of you are, any of you? Wow, you're all lucky. So what I should have actually realized that being a freelancer would actually be this. Because freelancers are always under the impression that they have control over everything. Okay, hey, we got a good grasp of things. We control our fate. We know exactly what we do.
Asterisk control your fate.
Exactly. But freelancing is hard. And the main reason is because customers are always pissed. Customers are always pissed. Regardless, if you do your job incredibly perfect, your customers will be pissed. Okay? Number two, you're always alone. You're always a loner. At most, you've got a community of people you work with, people you can ask technical questions, but at the end of the day, it's you, the keyboard, the accounting software, and your bank account. And if you're lucky, in that equation, you don't have your account manager at the bank calling you. Okay, that means you've done your stuff right. You're always on the lookout for the next gig. What is the next gig? You never know what the next gig, and that's actually quite a nice thing being a freelancer because you can diverse. You can learn new things. You're always torn. You're always torn between your desire to do interesting stuff and do the things that your customers ask, which sometimes are really boring. Honestly, between the years 2007 and 2011, I think that I've installed more automatic dialers, recording systems, or stupid IVR systems that you would call in, play a message, simply because that's what brought in the money. And of course, you're going half mad all the time. And this is the nature of things. And a few other things, and this is specifically for Israel. By the way, I didn't mention that I'm from Israel. When you freelance in Israel, most customers think they own you. Okay? And you are always under the impression that you're underpaid, and your customer always tells you that you're overcharged, which is always kind of a balance that is annoying. In most cases, you hate your customers. Personally speaking, I had several customers I hated. Really, I hated them so much. They were like here all the time. Unbelievable. And the worst thing about being a freelancer, and this is the one that really bugged me out, is the fact that I stopped experimenting. I built several paradigms. They worked really well, and I will just use them everywhere. It became kind of like an ultimate weapon. This was the way of working. Every time I wanted to deviate a little bit, I would find myself come back to the old stuff simply because I needed to get it working fast. That's it. And most freelancers always dream about passive income. How many of you are dreaming about passive income? Like saying, I want to wake up in the morning, see in my bank account, oh, there's another $1,000 in there. Everybody wants that. In 2009, I decided I want to not stop being a freelancer, but I wanted to work in a team. Time to do something else. So I joined a company called Humbug Telecom. So Humbug was a very interesting experiment into analyzing and preventing fraud in the enterprise, telephony fraud specifically. I joined Humbug as an architect to go about and eradicate the problem of enterprise telephony fraud. I joined as a consulting architect, and I had equity in the company. And the problem with doing something like that is that there is no such thing as half in. If you're a freelancer and you're thinking about joining some startup as half in, or you're working at an existing company, or you're thinking of maybe I'll spend some time with these guys, and if it works on, there is no half in. If you're not full in, it will never take off. And indeed, Humbug didn't take off. It still works. By the way, you can look it up on the internet, humbuglabs.org, you'll find it. You can sign up, you can hook up your system, and it will report back anything you want from your system, as long as you got the plugin working. But it's one thing I learned back then is that there is no half in. If you want to go in, just do it. And somewhere around 2010, I realized that back in Israel, IVR systems were fairly expensive. Most companies didn't have IVR systems. Even the IVRs that you would encounter for enterprise were kind of like boring. They were mostly auto attendants. There were never applications that would do things. And I realized, well, there's a bit of a market here. Let's figure it out. So I built the first system that was called Mockingbird. That's what I gave it the name. And I started doing hosted IVR. Israel back then didn't have CPaaS services. This is 2010. Twilio is 2009 when you think of chronological order. But we didn't have CPaaSs. Even today, there are no local CPaaSs in Israel, as everything is remote. Mockingbird used an XML RPC interface to provide a mechanism to develop applications. And between 2010 to 2015, I put almost 80 different customers on that system. At the peak of services, I basically did 12 million minutes monthly of IVR services, which when you think about it, one person working alone, back then to develop all of this is not bad. Sorry. Now, the interesting part is that Mockingbird was actually version 1 of what is now known as Cloudonics. This was the beginning. This was the actual start. So at 2012, I say goodbye to Humbug Telecom because it goes belly over. Simply because back then we had a CEO that imagined that he is Steve Jobs. So he would go on, so he would harass the developers saying, you see that, 2 pixels left, 2 pixels right, the 1 shade color blue left, more, but he would drive people nuts. It was not fun. We never got to actually doing the right product simply because we were busy doing GUI. By the way, if you log on today, the product works. That way you can do it. Around 2014, I have basically a vision. That vision came from working with another company where I realized that they were doing something wrong. I was consulting to a company back then called Yallo. So I don't know if anybody ever saw this app? Yallo? Y-A-L-L-O? So Yallo tried making by the way, they no longer exist. They tried making a voice over IP app that would give you a DID number, and you can do also the call recording like everybody else. And I got to working with them in 2012. And yet, it was yet another VoIP service. Nothing too fancy about it. They managed to spend almost $4.5 million in 18 months. Yeah, awesome. Too bad I didn't see any of it. But what I realized about what they do, what they did is that they had three fundamental mistakes inside their business. And first of all, they had a flaky SDK. The way they did the mobile environment was just wrong. It just was too flaky. Number two, they tried launching a service atop of a POC platform. You never do that. It's a POC, proof of concept. It's not supposed to cater to 200,000 or 500,000 users. It was just, what? Yeah, he was a piece of a cocky shit. That is true. And the worst of all is that they were too proud to listen. I had a case there with developers that were, so each one of them already exited twice. So they were so cocky going into a realm that they don't even understand without even listening. Guys, there are things you don't do. For example, you do not enable call recording on every call that runs on your platform simply because you think it's good. There is a thing like regulations and stuff like that. You don't do that. That was their claim to fame. All our calls are recorded. Of course, they got all kinds of letters from all kinds of people that said, no. So around mid-2014, I had this vision that the world needs a good SIP SDK for a mobile device, which didn't really exist. What everybody did was they either took PJ-SIP or VAX VoIP or some other low-end C++ type SDK or stack and tried to build their own. But all of that is just plain wrong because it's not really an SDK. If you ask anybody who uses PJ-SIP on a mobile device, what do? They will download the PJ-SIP project. There is a little part in there called PJ-SUA, which is an implementation of a user agent, and they'll just start hacking that little piece of code till it massages them and they end up with something working. Awesome, but it doesn't help you at the business scale. Because when you do that, the result is that you need to keep on hacking at that code, adapting it to every device, to every platform, to everything. And if you want it to work in a very specific way, it becomes really complicated. I also realized that an SDK only is wrong because the SDK needs a platform to work with. So around mid-2014, I end up in this idea that I want to create something bigger, something that will enable the world to communicate differently than what we're accustomed today. And I take with me a partner he was specifically a mobile expert, so he knew how to do things. And we get our first customer in mid-2014. It was a company in South Africa. And we were helping them out, trying to help them out to basically integrate it in. The result was this. We fell flat on our face. Yeah, exactly. Serious ouch. Yeah, I hope she's alive. Yeah. And why did we fail so miserably? Because there were various things in there that just didn't work right. The networks in South Africa were fairly slow, barely 3G back then. The customer wasn't willing to accept the fact that he is utilizing a brand new technology that nobody ever used, and that's what he is paying for. He's paying us to create something that was really unique. And the worst part was that he was not willing to accept the fact that, there is, in the term R&D, R stands for research. 50% of what we do is research. And sometimes research works and sometimes it doesn't. And you need to accept that. And we failed miserably. And so we ended up parting ways with that customer. kept on working on what we did other projects, and around late 2016, I part ways with my partner, sorry. We part ways. And the reason is, and every time I tend to ask myself, what really happened there? And I'll tell you this. So how many of you have partners? Is it complicated to have a partner?
No, not when it's your brother.
Oh, that's even worse. That's even worse. You can't get away from him.
Yeah, we get along well.
You get along well. Do you always agree on things?
Generally, yeah.
And generally, okay, so you're lucky. So I need the bad
It's
example.
like being married.
It's like being married. Yeah, but it's a different kind of marriage, you know? So who else picked up their hand that they have a partner? Yeah, so you have a partner. How is your relationship with him?
The same. Like, it's not my brother, but he's my buddy from university, so we get along pretty
Okay. So in Israel, I don't know if we have what's called in Israel, you have college buddies and you have army buddies. My partner was my friend for 18 years. Piece of time. But what I realized is that partners are very complicated, and the complication doesn't arise because you're technically different or you come from different backgrounds. Is that sometimes, although you are both very technically capable and you have a very clear view of the world of what needs to be done, you have very different ways of looking at the world from a business perspective, or from a personal perspective. Some may be driven only by hardcore cash. Some can be driven by the need to change the world, and others can be driven by the need to actually make a meaningful statement. Each one is driven differently. The question is your partner willing to accept that you are different from him? In some situations, it works. You're able to bridge it. Unfortunately, sorry to say, we weren't able to bridge our differences, and we had to part ways. Back then, when we parted ways, I decided to take the entire concept of what we were doing in a completely new direction, and to take Cloudonics into a new form of communications device. Today, I'm happy to say we are now 2 years, almost 2 years, 2.5, 2 years into the play. We've deployed over 7 million devices worldwide. We have active paying customers, and we have a solid proven technology, which took a lot of work to do. By the way, we're still working at it. It's a constant work. And one of the sayings says that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with people. And I've been very fortunate to gather around me a group of people that are very much minded to what we do. It's not always that you find that. How many of you are currently employed in a company and are thinking of branching out on your own and going alone? Or how many of you have recently done it? One person. Well, what do you do exactly?
I just did the opposite.
The opposite? What is the opposite?
Bought a company and sold it. So it just got acquired.
Oh, you got acquired.
Years ago. So it depends on where you are in your life cycle, too.
Yeah, it's all.
When you want to get out of it.
Exactly.
Motivations are.
The motivation is a little different. One thing that I found, and this is going to sound incredibly bad at this point, okay? I call this one for the road, and could be a few for the road, but take which one you want of it. And that is one of the things that people don't realize. Here's an interesting question. How many of you have the title of CEO of their company? I know 1, 2, 3. Okay, so we got about 4 or 5 people. Tell me something. As a CEO, how lonely are you? Like, the CEO, People don't realize this. Everybody thinks that the CEO is that guy that comes in the morning into the office, looks at everybody, says, everybody's making me money, right? This is what everybody thinks. Wrong. That is so untrue. The truth of the matter is that the CEO's seat, that chair, is nominally the loneliest position and the loneliest place in the company. Always. He takes decisions on his own. He answers to the board on his own. And whereas employees are not happy, he answers to that alone. So he may have HR and everything, but it doesn't matter. Eventually, it's him alone. It's the loneliest seat in the world. And my personal one for the road is this. What I've learned is that sometimes, as CEOs, we need to talk to other CEOs. My recommendation to you is to talk to other CEOs not from your business. So if you create yourself a peer group, these peer groups exist all over the world. I use one in Israel. My group, if you'll see it, you'll say, that's impossible. My group includes a guy that has a what do you call that? So he grows roses. That's what he does. Has a plantation for roses. A nursery for roses. Yeah? The other guy is an ad media company, and the other guy is a scientist. He's actually a professor that deals with analyzing data, scientific data across billions and records. Stuff like that. What?
CEOs Anonymous.
It's CEOs Anonymous, absolutely. But the thing is, what people don't realize is as CEOs, you normally, as a CEO, a beginner one, you normally believe that another CEO, if he's not from your field, will not be able to relate to your issues. He will not be able to talk to you. And that is completely wrong because we all deal with the exact same questions and the exact same issues. Sometimes it's in a different field. Sometimes in a different time of your maturity as a business. But they're all the same questions. And what I've learned over the course of now almost 18 years of working in this industry is that most of the geeks that I knew back in 2002, now have their own companies. Most of them now have sometimes 15, 20, 30, 100 employees under them. And that transition is hard. I remember Mark Spencer when Digium was still Linux support services and was no more than 6 people. That was in 2001. And I saw it grow as it went forward. And it changed. It changed him, it changed the company, and you in the crowd, like if you're going to do that, you will change as well. The question is, who are you going to take with you on that trip of change, if they will support you or they will become your menace? Number 2 is, who will you be able to take from the outside of your company to support you and to give you that feedback you sometimes need to say, wake up, you're an idiot. Sometimes I come to my meetings and there's a guy saying, you know something, you're an idiot. This is what you should do. And they will give an advice that makes perfect sense, and I then think about it simply because I was too tied up into my own environment. So, if you have questions or you would like to talk about anything starting with Cloudonics, leadership business, Asterisk, Camellia, or anything else that is voice over IP, or whiskey for that matter, that's fine as well. Yeah, you're welcome to contact me. And questions, I guess.
We have any questions from the audience?
One question.
Hi, it's widely accepted that management and technical geekery are very, very different skill sets. And what often ends up happening is that the default career advancement track for, well, anybody in any field really, often puts them in positions of management or executive leadership, and they find that 99% that's just a completely different skill set to what they were doing before. In the same way that someone who is good at baking
Right.
starts a bakery, and then they find that at least if it's a moderately successful bakery or better, then their day is mostly management and paperwork and very, very little baking.
Yeah.
How did you, what's a relatable or a condensed aspect of how you struggled with that in this process? Because you clearly have a very technical background and ended up in a position that's still quite technical, but is reliant on an entirely different set of skills.
Wow. I'll tell you this, it's not easy. Yes, I've taken a coach to help me do that. It's not something that I've learned. I come from a very weird background in terms of what I know and what I've studied. So I studied computer science. I left college in my last year simply because it bored the shit out of me. And I was no longer interested in the academics of it. It just didn't make sense to me. I could learn everything online. So I am very technical. But when I decided that I want to take the company into a new direction, I knew that my technical abilities are no longer the thing that will take the company forward. I need to learn a new skill set, just like you said. I had the good fortune of meeting a coach that identified the fact that I'm not ready, and he helped me learn that. There is no shame in saying I don't know. I didn't learn business management. Everything I learned along the way by doing. So today, if you talk about, if you want to talk to me about taxation law in Israel, I know most of it by heart. If you want to talk to me about MOC regulations in Israel, I know that also mostly by heart, but simply because I had to learn it as part of what I do. They normally don't interest technical people. They just interest, But you need someone. It can be a coach. It can be somebody you trust. It can be somebody who's already done the transition that you trust, and take him as a mentor, because that's what you need. Even the biggest CEOs have mentors. Jeff Bezos has a mentor. Richard Branson has a mentor. They all have mentors, because that mentor doesn't have to be better for you. He doesn't need to be more successful than you. He just needs to be that mirror that is in front of you to be able to tell you, wrong, doesn't make sense. Personally speaking, it's very hard. I am a technical person. I am frustrated sometimes with the fact that I hadn't written a piece of code in a long time, and I need to do it. But sometimes I do find myself, digging in, going into the code, going into the traces and figuring out stuff and investigating it, simply because I love doing it. It's just the quantification of how much you do it.
So Nir, let's get back a little bit to Cloudonics. So we've heard a lot about CPaaS, right?
Right.
So let's just explain exactly what CPaaS is and who your typical customer would be.
Okay, so let's start the question a little differently. How many of you know what a UCaaS is? UCaaS, UC as a service? Unified Communications. Okay, what is a CCaaS? CC as a service, call center as a service, contact center as a service. Now, if you look here in the US, you have companies that do UCaaS and CCaaS, and they're sometimes a little mixed. Dialpad, Phone.com, all of these guys, the various hosted. Now, then you have CPaaSs. CPaaSs are what's called Communication Platform as a Service, namely companies like Twilio, Nexmo, Plivo, VoIP Innovations, Appy Days, //. Now, all of these companies offer more or less an identical pitch. You come in, here's your SMS. Yay! Here's your PSTN. Yay! Here are your numbers. Yay! Here's your termination. Great. Awesome. They will normally tie you to a specific business model. So if you're working with Twilio, let's say you will pay per minute, per DID, per inbound, per outbound, per session, per device. It's kind of like a cat. Purr. Goes brrr. But the thing is that Cloudonics doesn't see itself as a CPaaS. It sees itself as, if you're a carrier, you can use it as a CPaaS enablement platform, because you can just hook it up into your system and launch out APIs to all your customers to do call control, to do provisioning, to do whatever you want. If you're an enterprise, you can use it as a customer aggregation platform to enable communications from your mobile app down to your call center, completely bypassing the carriers. So it is, if you look at it from the side, yes, it looks a little bit like a CPaaS because we provide similar tools. We provide APIs for application development. We provide APIs for messaging. There is an SDK for your mobile. But it is very different in the approach where it says, I don't want to know anything about your users. I don't want to know who they are. And I don't care who they are. And we want to do it in such a way that is completely secured and private from an enterprise point of view that currently doesn't exist with the traditional CPaaSs. Now, there are several tools out there that enable similar services, but they are fundamentally different. But if you want to talk about that, catch me after the talk and we'll talk about it as much as you want.